3 days ago, I buried my wife. So when a stranger walked into my blacksmith shop and set a heavy leather pouch on my anvil, my first thought was that he'd ridden to the wrong place. He didn't remove his hat. He didn't introduce himself. He simply rested one gloved hand on the pouch and looked at me as though we'd known each other for years. "The job's finished, blacksmith," he said, just like we agreed. I frowned. "I'm afraid you've mistaken me for somebody else." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. "No." He pushed the pouch across the anvil. Its weight scraped against the iron. "This is payment for killing Dr. Elizabeth Walker." For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. Dr. Elizabeth Walker was my wife. 3 days earlier, I'd stood beneath a gray Montana sky and watched her coffin disappear beneath 6 feet of fresh earth. I'd been the last man to leave her grave. I'd been the one to place my hand on the lid before they lowered it into the ground. So when this stranger calmly told me he'd come to pay for her murder, I wondered if the man had lost his mind. "Take your money," I said quietly, "and leave." His eyes narrowed. "Don't do this. I don't know who you think I am. I know exactly who you are." He tapped the pouch once with his finger. "You did your part. Now I'm doing mine." Then he turned. No anger, no hesitation. He climbed into the rancio, the saddle as calmly as a rancher leaving the general store, and rode away without looking back. I didn't call after him. I couldn't. I simply stood there. The forge crackled behind me. The smell of coal smoke filled the room. My hammer still lay beside the anvil, exactly where I'd dropped it before the stranger arrived. Only now there was something else beside it, a bag full of blood money. At that moment, I had no idea those coins would force me to question everything I believed about the woman I'd shared my life with for 12 years. Sometimes I think about that afternoon, about how close I came to picking up the pouch and throwing it into the river without opening it. If I had, I would have gone to my own grave believing I truly knew my wife. I stared at the leather pouch for what felt like an hour. I couldn't make myself touch it. It felt as though the moment my fingers closed around it, the stranger's words would somehow become real. Instead, I stepped outside. The road was empty. The rider had already vanished beyond the cottonwoods. Only a thin cloud of dust drifted lazily through the afternoon sunlight. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to ask who had hired him, who believed Elizabeth had been murdered, why they thought I was the man responsible. But there was no one left to answer. I walked back inside. The fire in the forge had begun to die. Out of habit, I grabbed a shovel and tossed another scoop of coal into the flames. My father always used to say, "When your mind can't find the answer, keep your hands moving." Usually that advice worked. Usually the rhythm of iron and steel quieted my thoughts. Not that day. Nothing could. Finally, I reached for the pouch. The leather felt colder than it should have. I loosened the cord and looked inside. 20 double eagles. Enough gold to earn a man respect or get him killed. Folded carefully between the coins was a single piece of paper. I unfolded it. Only one sentence had been written. "The doctor won't be helping anyone anymore. No signature, no initials, nothing." Just 7 words. That was the moment I stopped feeling angry and started feeling confused, because my wife had spent 12 years doing exactly the opposite. Hurting people simply wasn't in her nature. I had watched her treat children burning with fever, old ranchers whose hands had grown too stiff to hold a cup, cowboys kicked by horses, miners dragged out of collapsed tunnels, native families living beyond the river, travelers who couldn't even remember the town they'd come from, and more than once. I'd watched her care for men who admitted they couldn't pay her a single dollar. She never cared if someone knocked on our door asking for help. Elizabeth picked up her medical bag. That was the end of the conversation. She never asked whether the patient was rich. or poor, honest or dangerous. She only asked one question: where? Back then, I never realized that simple habit would change more lives than either of us could ever count. And I certainly never imagined it would one day bring a stranger to my forge, carrying gold meant for her killer. But if you want to understand why that man believed I'd murdered my own wife, we have to go back several weeks. Rain pounded against the roof of my forge so hard that it nearly drowned out the sound of my hammer striking hot iron. I'd already decided to close early. Storms like that kept most folks indoors. Across the room, Elizabeth sat at her work table, carefully cleaning each instrument before placing it back inside the old leather medical bag she'd carried for longer than I could remember. The bag looked almost as tired as she did. The leather had cracked where it folded. The shoulder strap had darkened from years beneath sun, snow, and rain. One brass buckle had been repaired twice by my own hands. I'd offered to make her a new one more times than I could count. She always refused. "This one's still got work left in it," she'd say. Truth be told, it sounded a lot like something she believed about people too. After 12 years of marriage, I'd come to recognize the sound that bag made when she snapped the brass clasp shut. Most evenings it meant our quiet supper wasn't going to stay quiet for long. Sure enough, 3 knocks echoed through the house. Not loud, not impatient, desperate. I opened the door. A boy stood on the porch. He couldn't have been older than 12. Rain poured from the brim of his hat. His boots were buried in mud nearly to the ankles. His chest rose and fell so hard, I wondered how far he'd ridden. "Doctor," he struggled to breathe. "Please." Elizabeth didn't wait for another word. She was already reaching for her coat. "Where?" "The old mill. My father's been hurt." I took the lantern from its hook. "I'm coming." She looked at me and smiled, the same smile she'd used to end every argument we'd ever had. "No, it'll be dark before you get there." "It already is." "If something goes wrong, I'll send someone." I shook my head. "You shouldn't ride out alone in weather like this." She stepped closer, rested one hand against my chest. "John, pain doesn't wait for sunrise." She'd said those words so many times, over the years, that I could almost hear them before they left her lips. That was Elizabeth Walker. She never saw strangers, only patients. She never divided people into good and bad, only those who needed help, and those who didn't. A minute later, she and the boy disappeared into the storm. I stood beneath the porch roof long after they were gone. The warm glow of her lantern grew smaller and smaller until the rain swallowed it whole. I didn't think anything of it. Nights like that were simply part of our life. Sometimes she returned within an hour. Sometimes she didn't come home until sunrise. Sometimes another knock came before she'd even taken off her boots. That was life when you were married to the only doctor for 50 miles in any direction. If someone had stopped me that evening and told me this ordinary rainy night would become the beginning of everything that followed, I would have smiled, wished them a good night, and gone back inside to finish my work. Elizabeth came home just before sunrise. The rain had eased into a cold drizzle, but she was soaked through anyway. Water dripped from the brim of her hat onto the floor as she stepped inside. I took her coat while she pulled off her gloves. "Did he make it?" I asked. She nodded wearily. "He will." That was all she'd ever say. Names stayed with the patient. Stories stayed with the patient. She believed a doctor's duty didn't end with stitching a wound or setting a broken bone. It included keeping another person's burdens to yourself. I poured her a cup of coffee while she warmed her hands beside the stove. Neither of us spoke for a while. Silence had never been uncomfortable between us. Finally, she smiled. "You've been waiting all night again." "I told you I'd stay awake." "You always do." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It was such a small thing, but after 12 years together, I knew it meant more than words ever could. By noon, life had settled back into its usual rhythm, or at least, that's what I believed. Elizabeth hung her medical bag on the hook beside the kitchen door. As I always did, I lifted it to straighten the strap. The weight surprised me. I nearly dropped it. I frowned. "What on earth have you got in here?" She looked up, only for a moment. Only for the briefest heartbeat. But something crossed her face that I'd never seen before. Not fear. Not exactly. More like hesitation. Then it vanished. "Just paperwork," I laughed. "That must be the heaviest paperwork in Montana." She smiled back. "So says the man who owns 4 hammers that all look exactly alike." "I need every one of them." "You certainly believe that." I hung the bag back where it belonged, and the conversation ended there. Back then, I thought nothing of it. Looking back, now I realize something that never crossed my mind that day. It was the first time in 12 years Elizabeth had hidden anything from me. Not because she didn't trust me, because she was trying to protect me. I simply didn't know it yet. Life moved on. Days blended into one another, just as they always had. The forge stayed busy from morning until dusk. Farmers came with broken plows. Cowboys needed horses shod before long drives. Children wandered in just to watch sparks fly from the anvil while their fathers talked business. Across the road, Elizabeth's waiting room rarely stayed empty for long. Some mornings she treated a ranch hand thrown from his horse. That same afternoon, she might ride 20 miles to deliver a baby. By evening, she'd be stitching up a hunter who'd mistaken his own knife for a piece of firewood. Then someone would knock after midnight. And she'd go all over again. That was simply our life. Neither of us questioned it anymore, until the old man did. The first time I noticed him, he was standing across the street, not speaking to anyone, not buying supplies, just watching our house. He wore an old cavalry coat, faded almost white beneath years of sun. His boots had been repaired so many times, they barely looked like boots anymore. His beard reached halfway down his chest, but none of that caught my attention. It was his eyes. They carried the weight of a man who had spent far too many years looking over his shoulder. The moment he realized I'd seen him, he tipped his hat politely and walked away. I forgot about him before sunset. 3 days later, he returned. This time he walked straight to our front porch. I opened the door before he had a chance to knock twice. "Afternoon," I said. He gave a slow nod. "I'm looking for Dr. Walker." Elizabeth appeared from the next room. "I'm Elizabeth." The old man stared at her for several long seconds, long enough to make me uncomfortable. Finally, he asked, "May I come in?" We sat around the kitchen table. Elizabeth offered coffee. He politely declined. For a while, he simply looked around the room. The forge could be heard through the open window. The smell of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. It was such an ordinary afternoon, which made what happened next feel even stranger. The old man slipped a weathered leather notebook from inside his coat. It wasn't much bigger than his hand. The leather was cracked. The corners had worn smooth with age. He held it carefully, almost reverently, as though it weighed far more than paper ever should. "I've carried this," he said quietly, "for 22 years. His voice was rough, not from age, from memory. I prayed I'd never have to give it to another soul. Elizabeth didn't interrupt. She simply waited. The old man slowly laid the notebook on the table between them. "I don't have much time left. I've buried too many friends. I've watched too many good people disappear, and I can't carry this any farther." Elizabeth looked down at the notebook. "What is it?" "I'll tell you someday. Today. You only need to know that it must never fall into the wrong hands." She looked back at him. "Why me?" He smiled sadly. "Because I asked about you. I asked ranchers. I asked miners. I asked the pastor. I even asked the sheriff. They all told me the same thing. He paused. They said if there was one person in this valley who'd risk everything for someone she'd never met, it was Dr. Elizabeth Walker. Silence settled over the room. Outside, the wind rattled the porch swing. Inside, only the ticking clock broke the stillness. Elizabeth rested one hand on the notebook. If I accept this, what changes? The old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the mountains beyond the window. Finally, he said, "The day you learn what's inside, some people will decide you'd be better off dead." I felt my stomach tighten. Elizabeth remained calm. "And if I refuse?" He nodded once. "I'll leave. I'll keep searching. But I'm running out of time." Another long silence passed, long enough for the fire to crackle twice inside the stove. Then Elizabeth slowly pulled the notebook toward herself. "I'll keep it." The old man's shoulders sagged with relief, for the first time since he'd entered our home. He smiled, a real smile, small, tired, but genuine. When he reached the door, he stopped. Without turning around, he spoke one final sentence. "If life ever offers you the easy road, don't trust it." Then he walked away. I watched him disappear down the dusty road until he became nothing more than another shadow beneath the afternoon sun. When I turned back toward the house, Elizabeth was still sitting exactly where he'd left her. The notebook rested on the table in front of her. She hadn't opened it. She simply stared at it, as if she already knew that the moment she turned the first page, our lives would never be the same. For 2 days, the notebook remained exactly where the old man had left it. Elizabeth never opened it in front of me, not because she was trying to keep a secret. That wasn't who she was. It was something else. She was thinking. I caught her staring at it more than once, sometimes while drinking her morning coffee, sometimes while standing at the kitchen window after sunset. She looked as though she was trying to decide whether opening the notebook would change her life or someone else's. On the 3rd evening, she finally carried it into her office. She closed the door behind her. The lamp burned late into the night, long after every light in town had gone dark. Hers was still glowing through the curtains. When she finally came to bed, she slipped beneath the blankets as quietly as she could. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. "Everything all right?" I whispered. She hesitated, then answered with a smile I couldn't see. "Just reading." I reached for her hand beneath the blanket. It was colder than usual. She squeezed my fingers once, then we both pretended to sleep. The following morning, she left before sunrise. She never told me where she was going. That wasn't unusual. Patients often lived hours away. Sometimes they sent word during the night. Sometimes she simply knew someone would need her before they did. I spent the morning in the forge. By noon, I had almost forgotten about the notebook. Then I looked up. Elizabeth was riding back toward town. Her horse was exhausted. Its head hung low. Its sides were covered with sweat despite the cool morning. She climbed down slowly. Slower than I'd ever seen. "You all right?" She smiled. "Just a long ride." I reached for her medical bag. Again. It felt heavier than it should have. This time I almost asked. Instead, I didn't. Trust has a strange way of silencing questions, especially after 12 years of marriage. That evening we ate supper together. Neither of us spoke very much. She seemed somewhere else, not frightened, not distracted, determined. As though she'd already made a decision she couldn't take back. Before we went to bed, she surprised me. She walked around the table, wrapped both arms around my shoulders, and held me there. Longer than usual. "So?" I laughed quietly. "What's this for?" She rested her head against my chest. "For believing in me." "I've always believed in you." "I know." She stepped back. There was something in her eyes, something I couldn't understand. If one day, she began, then stopped. I smiled. One day what? She looked away. Nothing? No, I said. You don't start a sentence like that and leave it hanging. She let out a soft laugh. If one day I'm not here. I immediately shook my head. Don't. I'm serious. I know, but I don't want to hear it. She reached for my hand. Just promise me something. What? If you ever have to choose between living with answers or living with peace, choose peace. I frowned. I don't understand. I hope you never do. Those were the last mysterious words she ever spoke to me. The next morning, two well-dressed riders stopped outside the house. They weren't ranchers. They weren't lawmen. Their horses were too expensive. Their boots to clean. One of them removed his gloves before knocking. Does Dr. Walker live here? She does. Is she available? She's with a patient. We'll wait. They waited nearly 40 minutes. Neither man spoke. Neither looked around. They simply sat in silence. When Elizabeth finally stepped outside, one of them tipped his hat. They walked a short distance away, far enough that I couldn't hear a single word. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. When it ended, both men climbed back onto their horses. Before leaving, one of them said, "Thank you, Doctor. We won't trouble you again." Elizabeth watched them ride away until they disappeared over the hill. Who were they? I asked. She kept looking at the empty road. People who needed help. They didn't look sick. They weren't. I waited for more. Nothing came. That night she barely touched her supper. Later, while we sat on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the mountains, she suddenly asked, "John, do you still believe that every good deed comes back to us?" I smiled. I have to. Why? Because the world would be a miserable place if it didn't. She nodded slowly. And what if it comes back too late? I thought about that for a moment, then shrugged. I suppose late is still better than never. She smiled, not because she agreed, because she wanted to remember the answer. 2 mornings later, the church bell rang, not once, not twice, again and again. Every person in town knew what that meant, fire or death. I dropped my hammer before it even struck the anvil. People were already hurrying toward the church square. A wagon stood in the middle of the road. Someone lay beneath a blanket. As I pushed through the crowd, I recognized the face immediately. It was the old man, the one who had brought Elizabeth the notebook. He was still breathing, barely. Elizabeth knelt beside him before anyone else could move. He opened his eyes, looked directly at her, then reached weakly beneath his coat. With trembling hands, he pulled out a small folded package wrapped in oilcloth. He pressed it into her hands. His lips moved. I leaned closer to hear him. "It's time." Those were the last words he ever spoke. His hand slipped from hers. The square fell silent. No one said a word. No one needed to. I looked at Elizabeth. She stood perfectly still. The little package remained clutched tightly against her chest. For the first time since I'd known her, I saw fear in her eyes. The old man's funeral was held the following afternoon. Hardly anyone attended. A preacher, the sheriff, 3 ranchers, Elizabeth and I. No one seemed to know where he'd come from. No one knew whether he had any family. By sunset, the town had already forgotten him. Elizabeth hadn't. She carried the small oilskin package into her office and locked the door behind her. Late that evening, she finally opened it. I never asked what she found inside. She never offered to tell me. Over the next 2 days, something changed. Not in the way she smiled, not in the way she spoke, but in the way she watched the world around her. Whenever a horse stopped outside our house, she'd glance toward the window. Whenever someone knocked at the door, She'd pause for the briefest moment before opening it. Most people would never have noticed. I did. After 12 years together, I knew every version of Elizabeth Walker, even the quiet ones. On the third morning, she walked into the kitchen already dressed for riding. "I need to go to Livingston." I looked up from my coffee. "A patient?" She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, it wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. I kissed her forehead before she left. "Don't work too hard," she smiled. "I'll try." She returned after sunset. The ride had clearly taken everything out of her. Her horse was exhausted, so was she. As she stepped down from the saddle, I noticed something strange. Her medical bag felt lighter than ever before. Whatever had made it so heavy days earlier was gone. That night she barely ate. She spent nearly an hour sitting on the porch, staring at the mountains, while darkness settled across the valley. I sat beside her without speaking. Sometimes silence is the kindest thing you can offer someone. When we finally went inside, she stopped me before I reached the bedroom. "John," I turned around. She wrapped both arms around me, held me tighter than she ever had before. "Thank you." I laughed softly. "For what?" "For never asking me to become someone else." "You wouldn't have listened." She smiled. "No, I probably wouldn't." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, "I love you." There was nothing unusual about those words. She'd said them thousands of times. Only later would I realize she'd never said them quite like that. Sometime during the night, I woke to the sound of coughing. Elizabeth was sitting on the edge of the bed. Her shoulders trembled. "You all right?" She quickly folded a handkerchief and slipped it into her pocket. "I'm fine." "You don't sound fine." "It's just a chill." I climbed out of bed and added another log to the stove. The room slowly filled with warmth. She accepted the cup of hot water I handed her. As she lifted it to her lips, I caught a glimpse of the handkerchief. There was blood on it, only a little, enough to make my heart sink. "You've been coughing blood." She immediately shook her head. "It's nothing." "A burst vessel." "It happens." She was the doctor. I wasn't, so I believed her. I helped her back beneath the blankets. Within minutes she was asleep. I remained awake much longer, listening to her breathing. It sounded heavier than usual, but steady. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with me. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains. I reached across the bed. "Elizabeth." No answer. I smiled to myself. She always hated sleeping late. "Elizabeth." Still nothing. I touched her hand. Cold. Far too cold. Everything inside me stopped. I called her name again, louder this time, then again, and again. I don't remember running outside. I don't remember shouting for help. I only remember the doctor from the next town arriving less than half an hour later. He examined her quietly, too quietly. Finally, he removed his spectacles, looked at me, and without saying a word, I already knew. "I'm sorry, John." She's gone. The days that followed exist only in fragments. Neighbors filled the house with food no one touched. The church ladies covered every mirror. Friends spoke words I couldn't hear. People kept telling me time would heal everything. They were wrong. Time doesn't heal. It only teaches you how to carry the weight. 3 days later, I buried my wife. 3 days after that, a stranger rode into my forge, placed a leather pouch full of gold onto my anvil, and thanked me for killing her. I returned to the present with my hands resting on that same leather pouch. Only now, I remembered everything: the notebook, the old man, the mysterious riders, the package wrapped in oilcloth, the questions Elizabeth never answered. I closed the pouch. There was only one conclusion left. Whoever had paid me believed Elizabeth had died because of whatever the old man had entrusted to her. And if they believed that, then somewhere, Someone was still looking for it. I locked the forge, picked up my coat, and walked home. For the first time since Elizabeth's funeral, I wasn't going home to grieve. I was going home to find the truth my wife had died protecting. I reached home just before sunset. For the first time since Elizabeth's funeral, I wasn't walking through that front door as a grieving husband. I was walking in as a man searching for answers. The house felt exactly as she'd left it. Her shawl still hung beside the door. A half-read medical journal rested on the corner of her desk. Her spectacles lay folded beside it. For a long moment, I simply stood there, waiting. Some foolish part of me still expected to hear her footsteps. Instead, there was only silence. I began searching. Every drawer, every shelf, every cupboard. I opened every book she'd ever owned, looked beneath loose floorboards, even searched the attic. Nothing. No notebook, no oilskin package, no explanation. Just before giving up, I walked back into her office. The evening sun spilled across the bookshelves she'd used almost every day. I ran my hand absent-mindedly across the side of the largest shelf. Something felt wrong. One board wasn't perfectly flush. I pressed against it. A quiet click echoed through the room. The narrow panel slid open. Behind it was a hidden compartment. I stared at it in disbelief. In 12 years, I'd never known it existed. Inside lay two things: Elizabeth's old medical bag and the worn leather notebook. She hadn't hidden them from me. She'd hidden them from whoever came after her. With trembling hands, I lifted the notebook. The leather was warm from the afternoon sun. When I opened the first page, there was no title, no author's name, only a single sentence written in Elizabeth's handwriting. "If you're reading this, I'm already gone." I stopped breathing. Beneath those words was another line: "The truth is no longer mine to protect." I turned the page. What I found wasn't a diary. It wasn't a journal. It was a record. Names, dates, places, payments, land deeds, witnesses. Entire families forced from their homes. Sheriffs bribed to ignore crimes. Judges who had signed documents they knew were false. Ranches stolen. Murders disguised as accidents. And in the margins, Elizabeth's own notes, confirmed. Spoke with widow. Child survived. Evidence moved. Every page revealed another piece of a story, far larger than I had ever imagined. The old man hadn't spent 22 years protecting a notebook. He'd spent 22 years protecting the truth. Near the back I found the oilskin package. Inside were copies of deeds, signed confessions, letters, and photographs. Enough evidence to destroy some of the wealthiest men in the territory. Then something slipped from between the final pages. A folded envelope. My name was written across the front. John. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest John, if this letter has found you, then I wasn't given the chance to tell you goodbye. First, I need you to know something. You were never in danger because of who you are. You were only in danger because you loved me. I'm sorry for that. The notebook doesn't belong to us. It belongs to every family that lost a father, a son, a home, all the chance to live honestly. Don't waste your life hunting the people responsible. Revenge only creates another widow. Instead, finish what I couldn't. Take the evidence to Judge Samuel Carter in Helena. He's one of the few honest men left. Everything else has already been arranged. I frowned. Already arranged? I continued reading. Several copies already exist. If anything happened to me, they were to be mailed automatically. No one can bury the truth anymore. A tear landed on the paper. I'd spent days believing Elizabeth had died protecting evidence. The truth was, she'd already made sure it couldn't disappear. She'd won before she'd died. The letter continued. One last thing. Don't close the forge. Don't hide from the world because of me. People still need horses shod. Children still need someone to fix broken wagon wheels. Someone will still knock on your door someday. When that day comes, answer it. And if happiness ever finds you again, please don't send it away out of loyalty to my memory. Loving someone after I'm gone won't mean you loved me any less. It will only mean you listened. I have loved you every day since the moment we met. Nothing, not even death, can change that. Forever yours, Elizabeth. I don't remember how long I sat there. The sun disappeared. Darkness filled the room. Still I couldn't move. The following morning I saddled my horse. 3 days later, Judge Carter received everything. Within months, arrests began. Some men fled. Others stood trial. A few disappeared before the law reached them. It didn't matter. The truth survived. That's what Elizabeth had fought for. Years have passed since then. The notebook now rests inside the same hidden compartment where she left it. The names inside it have all been crossed out. Not because they were forgotten, because every promise she made was kept. Sometimes travelers still stop at my forge. Some ask whether it's true that a stranger once paid me to murder my own wife. I always give them the same answer. Yes. They paid the wrong man. Then they usually ask whether I ever found the people responsible. I smile. They were never the real story. The real story was my wife. Because even after Elizabeth Walker died, people kept living because of the choices she made. And every time someone knocks on my door asking for help, I remember the words she spoke the night she rode into the storm. Pain doesn't wait for morning. Neither, I've learned, does hope.